Hey, Reyan.
Hey, hey, what's going on, dude? Hey,
Great
thank
to
you so much
have
for
you here,
having me.
man. Uh,
Hey, yeah, I realized I didn't have the Instagram permissions right, so I had to I just switch them around a little bit.
no worries. Yeah, it's always kind of a little bit worrisome every time we try to set up these Instagram lives. Um,
I was about to say, I feel like I'm certain you have a moment of anxiety, of panic, of like, okay, does this person know what they're doing? Is this going to go right for like the first few minutes? Because
ev-
like, once it's going, I'm sure you're fine. But yeah,
every time we do it, I'm always holding on for like dear life about, oh my gosh, please, internet, make this work.
exactly, yeah.
So I
Um,
kind of want to just like give people a little bit of introduction for people who are watching this now and who will be watching it later. You are the author of NBA Jam, the book, and for anyone that is enjoying right now the Last Dance documentary, I will probably say your book is probably as close as it can get to the video game version of
wow.
in our world in terms of like the
Wow,
Last
what that
Dance.
is incredible compliment. Thank you. As somebody who's listening to the Lance Dance soundtrack today,
Mhm.
I was listening to Big Pun and Alan Parsons Project just today. That is a huge, huge compliment. Thank you so much.
Well, no, it's the parallels are very similar if you think about it, because your book, just like The Last Dance is not just about the Chicago Bulls team from 1998. It goes more and so to the backstory of what kind of led to Jordan and his career. It's the cultural impact of that 1998 or that whole Chicago Bulls dynasty in the first place. And just where we look back in a retrospective at the Chicago Bulls and Jordan's legacy, the Last Dance really kind of covers like so many facets of that team from so many different angles. Similar, your book, it's not just about NBA Jam. It's not just about a video game. It's
Hmm.
about what led to
Yeah.
that point, what got us to the creation of a video game. And it in a way, reading your book, it was a little bit of the wild, wild west in terms of like how this game was created. Um,
Most definitely.
and more specifically too, what that book, or sorry, what the game represented, it wasn't just a game. It was almost like a part of like the 90s pop culture zeitgeist, if you kind of look at it. And then in general too, when you look back at again what is the historical context of NBA Jam, the implications of the game, are far-reaching, even till today in terms of like what NBA culture is. Um, the first question I just have to really ask you, for all the kids who are probably say like these generation, Z kids out there who really
Mhm.
don't really know much about kind of the lore of NBA Jam, what in a nutshell makes it so special that it resonates even till today?
Yeah. So NBA Jam is basketball distilled. So you take all those elements of the game and you just drill it down to 2-on-2. You get all the highlights. NBA Jam is basically one big highlight reel as a video game. You've got the crazy dunks. You've got an on fire mode, so three shots and you're on fire. You've got crazy secret characters that make it feel like the game is really unpredictable. You've got the classic teams of the early 90s that really just add a whole other dimension to it, and it's a really fun game. It's one of those games that really holds up. I go back and I play NBA Jam, of course, and I played NBA Jam while working on the book so many times, and I thought, like, wow, this is still a really good game. It isn't just the nostalgia talking; it's still really fun, and it was designed really well. But yeah, NBA Jam, it is the iconic arcade basketball game. There is nothing I would say that is better when it comes to arcade basketball than NBA Jam. Actually, you know what? I don't think that's too much of a long shot to say. I don't feel like I have to. I'm like, it's not an arguably. NBA Jam is the arcade basketball game, and it made a lot of money for a lot of people, and it helped to create this whole era of arcade sports at Midway, which was so cool. I was a huge Midway fan as a kid, huge Midway fan as an adult, but especially as a kid. And NBA Jam started off that whole arcade sports era. And I mean, combine that with Mortal Kombat, Midway was just on fire back in the day. So with NBA Jam, you've got all these different elements. You've got that early 90s NBA, all those NBA teams that were fantastic. You've got Midway and the arcade business really hitting a peak in the early 90s. You've got all the great gameplay of the game, the secret characters, the legends. There's just so much to it. And one of the things I really enjoyed about working on this book was, in my head, NBA Jam is a really small game. I mean, you're essentially just looking at one screen the whole time. I mean, you go back and forth between, oh, enter your initials or this or that, but you're basically just watching four people run back and forth across the court. But it's still such a fun game, and it's so dense with so much lore and so many amazing personalities connected with it. So, yeah, NBA Jam is just It's a legend. It's a legend for a reason. I mean, it made a lot of money, and it managed to create this whole era of arcade sports that I think really, really left an impact on people.
Now, when you wrote the book, Rayon, you kind of, what angle, I guess, were you primarily trying to take in trying to draft this book? Because again, you cover so many angles, and
Yeah,
I don't want to give anything away, but you even cover areas that it's not just about NBA Jam in this book. You also talk about Midway's other, I guess, like arcade hits, and kind of like a little bit the backstory of like them as a developer, kind of like trying to figure their way around and becoming almost in a way, I would almost, if I had to kind of give another film analogy, they're almost like the A24 of like, uh, you know, video game developers of
yeah.
like the 90s. Like everything they did was kind of just a critically acclaimed commercial smash hit. Um, so what angle, I guess, were you trying to like kind of frame the book, whether it's like from a sports angle, video game angle, to like a historical context, pop culture context? Because there's so
Yeah.
much to wrap around. So how did you kind of frame this narrative?
That is a great question. There was really so much to go through that I was trying to figure out when I was first coming up with the pitch. This is back 5 years ago, back in 2015. That I was like, if there was an NBA Jam book, what would an NBA Jam book be? So fundamentally, it's about the game developers, because NBA Jam is a sports video game, but ultimately it's a video game, and that whole world that's wrapped around it has all these personalities to go with it from Midway that were really intriguing to me. So as a kid, actually, this is funny. My very first ever writing gig ever, as a 13 or 14-year-old was writing for a Mortal Kombat website. So that was it. That was the ground floor for me. And I love Midway. And as a huge 90s NBA fan and as a huge Midway fan, I've been writing for several years. And I was like, I know I want to do a book. But what's a book that really or what's a subject that really has enough meat on the bone? Like, what is something that's out there that has enough people I could talk to for it, that has some, I can still uncover a whole lot of new information, something that would really keep me stimulated for as long as it would take to get through to the end. So when I really thought about it, it was really about the developers. I mean, Mark Turmel, fascinating character, and he's the lead designer of NBA Jam. So for all intents and purposes, the creator of NBA Jam. So I knew he had to play a major part in the book. I didn't quite know how I was going to structure it right when I first came up with the idea, but fundamentally it was always about the game and about that rise and fall, because I loved NBA Jam just as so many other people did, just as you do. But it isn't something that people really talk about anymore. So I wanted to get into an idea of also, why was this thing so popular once upon a time, and why is it no longer that thing that it once was?
Hmm. And so it's fascinating because again, just for people to give context about you, you're an established writer. Your work has appeared in Wired, The Atlantic. Uh, at what point did you just decide, you know what, I want to write this book? Because again, the backstory for people who are knowing, like this took you quite a few years writing
It
this
did.
book, and you really kind of dug deep. You didn't just get with the developers. You kind of also interviewed Shaq and hidden characters like Jazzy Jeff or DJ Jazzy
Yeah, DJ Jazzy Jeff. Yeah.
DJ Jazzy Jeff. So you kind of went out of your way to kind of like find a lot of like the history behind this book. So at what point did you say, okay, I'm going to make this pitch with Boss Fight, the publisher of the book?
Mhm.
What was kind of like the spark that let's make this happen?
Yeah. So Boss Fight had an open call for pitches back in 2015. And back when I was putting together that idea, I spent a lot of time going through old NBA Jam articles. And I just kept seeing so many cool people that would pop up along the way. I mean, you already know that NBA Jam lore is associated with so many different people and, bits and pieces of different eras. And, when I started off with it, like I said before, it all started off with the developers. But doing something like getting DJ Jazzy Jeff or getting Shaq for the book is something really special. I mean, how often can you be able to talk to these people in general, much less about a game? So I knew that there was a big interest in NBA Jam from those people. So I really had to go above and beyond. So I wanted to get all perspectives. I think what makes, what allows you to really tell the whole story of something like NBA Jam that's had so much of an impact on people is you got to go from top to bottom. So I tried to get whoever I could at Midway who was at the highest level. So I was getting, developers. Didn't have any luck with the execs that I tried, but I went up as developers. Actually, I did have execs from Acclaim,
Mm.
but yeah, developers, artists, people who were around the team at the time, people who are fans of the game, famous fans and non-famous fans alike. So I wanted to really stretch it wide. So initially it was like, okay, I just want an opportunity to be able to talk to these people and see if I can get it. So what's funny is I tried so many more people that I wasn't able to get for the book for whatever reason. Either they don't get back to me or they say, we appreciate the offer, but we respectfully decline. So I really cast the net wide. And in the end, I managed to get so many people because the love for NBA Jam is so strong. People still associate it with so much happiness and all this positivity. I mean, it isn't one of those things where it's like, okay, we're going to talk about NBA Jam and we're getting into some sad stuff or something serious. Everybody's going to revisit some of the best times of their life. So that was an amazing door opener for me. So getting Shaq was one of the biggest things that I was able to do. And it was really weird calling him up from work. I remember the day I called him up from work, or actually he called me up. And, I was in my day job and I had to specifically slip away for a little bit into this little huddle room, waited for him to call. He didn't call for a bit. And then I sent his manager a message like, hey, is he going to call? By the way, it'd been 5 months that I've been trying to track him down at this point. So the chances of him calling seemed like they'd be pretty good eventually, but I didn't know about this day. And then all of a sudden I get an unknown caller and it's Shaq. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. Talking to him on the phone from my work in Columbus, Ohio. He was pulling out of his driveway in Florida. I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like NBA Jam is allowing me to talk to Shaq on speakerphone over here. Like from my work, and it's also giving me the opportunity to tell an amazing story along the way. So it's not just about, these are some cool celebrities, but also like, these are people who have some real fun perspective and some stories that not everybody would know. So yeah, got to cast the net wide, especially for something like this where there's that lore there. Like I knew there was going to be meat on the bone. Like John Romero was somebody else who I didn't really think of at the beginning, but then towards maybe halfway through the process, maybe 2/3 through the process, I decided to give him a try, and I got him too. So the love for NBA Jam was really what opened all those doors.
Wow. And it's funny also that you interviewed Shaq because, again, you might have to refresh my memory. When I remember playing NBA Jam, he wasn't really one of the players that you can actually play as. And I believe at some point there were some characters that were shipped for like the home versions that actually included Charles Barkley, and some that somehow became Dan Marley and Kevin Johnson. And then I believe Shaq, I'm not sure if he actually was in the home version, but I also recall maybe he wasn't even in the arcade version.
So he was in the very first arcade version, that earliest revision. So he was in the earliest games. And, there's still footage out there, and there's still screenshots out there of him in the earliest part of the game. But then licensing came along, and it ended up pulling him out of the game, or he ended up pulling himself out of the game, I'm sure. But what's funny is that even with all this happening, he was still a massive NBA Jam fan himself. So it sounds like it was just business, like in terms of him not being in the game. But, so when I talked to him, he was, I tried to get an idea of like, okay, how much of an NBA Jam fan are you? Like in the way of like, is it, there's nothing wrong with being a casual NBA Jam fan, but just I wanted to get an idea. So he was telling me, how he started out really loving Double Dribble. That was his game. That was his arcade basketball game. And then NBA Jam came along and just blew it out of the water. And then he was telling me these incredible stories about how he would have an NBA Jam cabinet at his place. So at his place over in Orlando, he would have an NBA Jam machine, and his Magic teammates would come over and play on it. So it's like, wow, this is so cool. But then, the more I dug into it, he really loved the game. So he was really big on using 3-point shooters. So his whole idea was that I want to use NBA Jam to do what I can't do in real life. So he never played it as himself, not a single time from what he told me. It was all about playing as somebody else. So in the end, he ended up getting removed from the game. But I know that he was still a massive NBA Jam fan no matter what. And he was still getting to play as the players that he really liked to play as, like Chris Mullin and Reggie Miller, those really killer 3-point shooters.
Wow, that's random. What?
Yeah. Well, I'm almost certain it's Mullin is the one I'm thinking of, who's like, it was a really great 3-point shooter.
Yeah.
So it was all about those threes for him, and it was really cool thinking that this guy is, in the early '90s, Shaq is still everywhere to some degree, but in the early '90s, Shaq was really just the hottest thing going, and thinking that he's taking the time out of his day to buy an NBA Jam machine and put it in his house and get into the game and play it and whatnot. It was just really such a great image, and that was something amazing that I learned about in more detail because of this book. So I knew there was amazing stories out there, but learning about how the Magic would play the Sega Genesis version was so cool too. So the Orlando Magic,
Wow.
Yeah, there's a video of Shaq being interviewed by Magic Johnson at his place, at Shaq's place, while they play NBA Jam together. I'm like, this is incredible. Like, wow, these guys are legends over here, and they're hanging out with Midway's arcade game.
Wow.
So it's super cool. I mean, it's one of those things that people really love NBA Jam, and that love still really holds up too. You know, it isn't one of those things where it's like, oh, I remember that, I like that, that was cool, and then move on. But no, people still talk about it. So Shaq gave me a Boom Shakalaka. I didn't even have to ask him. He just delivered one. But he loved Tim Kitzrow. He loved that NBA Jam announcer. So he was super cool to talk to, and his love for the game was very real.
Yeah, and for people who are kind of watching and don't really kind of know, they were too young to kind of realize like the start of Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq is very like in a way like the video game version of a basketball character. Like when he first got into the NBA, he was literally destroying the backboard. Like that was what I recall. Like remember him the most was like, dude, this guy just comes in and he destroys the backboard, causes a 3-hour delay before a game. And in NBA Jam, that's one of the things that you would be able to do is like literally like, completely,
Right.
Wreck a backboard. But what is it about kind of like that 90s roster that makes NBA Jam so special? And I guess we got a bunch of questions earlier through our DMs that, could NBA Jam be as special as it was if it had come out today with today's roster? So I guess like it's almost like that question in a way if you think about like who's better, LeBron versus Jordan.
Right.
So in a way, what would you say if like the 90s roster versus I guess like something like a roster of like today with like LeBron and KD, how much was that roster an impact of like the success of the game?
Yeah, I think it had a really big impact. Whether if it came out now, I think it would be possible for the game to be a huge hit, but you'd have to have the right delivery mechanism behind it. So back then, you had the arcade as this great delivery mechanism. It's the style of game that really lends itself to playing an arcade game. Where you're popping quarters, you're getting 3 minutes of excitement at a time, probably less than 3 minutes, knowing how Midway rigged the clocks. I'd say comparing the two, of course, I'm gonna lean towards the past because that's the verified thing. That's the real McCoy back then. I think right now if they had a Mark Trammell steering the ship, they could have made NBA Jam right now and it would be really big. But you'd need to have a lot going on over there. But that early '90s roster, man, it was for me. As a big basketball fan, it was always about the personalities. So you had Shaq and Jordan and Barkley and all these people that really they exuded a lot of charisma. I mean, Barkley alone had, all of his run-ins with, him not being a role model, and then he had the Nike ad. There we go. Oh, the classic shot. Yeah, that is the real classic era. Look at that. Oh, look at that Suns jersey. God, that's beautiful.
You could just tell how cool the NBA in the 90s was. It's like, for anyone that's a basketball fan, I'm telling you, there is nothing that will ever compare to the NBA on NBC, watching NBA Inside Stuff, and then when NBA Jam came out, like that was it. Like NBA,
that was peak.
Dude, it's like a whole other level, and it was.
Oh, it was next level.
It was more than
next level.
Yeah, it was more than a sport. It was pop culture, and that's what I, quite frankly, like you can't compare that level of magnitude of any sport now to what it was like back in the early '90s. But I'm sorry to continue on in terms of that roster. What's fascinating though is that when I look back on it, it was, again, it's 2-on-2, right? And personally, me as a kid, I didn't really know the NBA roster until NBA Jam. Like, I really did not know players.
Me too. It's fun. Yeah, we're kindred spirits right there.
Yeah. And one of the coolest things about NBA Jam, I would say, was that it allowed you to kind of know who are the two best players, at least, on every team, in a way, in some aspects. So I guess, like, one of the things, like, in looking back on it now, what were some of the players that you feel were like the biggest snubs that somehow were really good, but because of the format of the game, like they just didn't make the cut?
Oh man, in terms of ones that were I would have really to think about that. In my head,
we'll say like outside the Jordan, outside the obviously the big superstars, but was there any
like Magic Johnson and whatnot? Yeah. I mean, there were some guys I loved from that era. Cedric Ceballos was so good. I always think of him with that classic dunk contest. He did the blindfolded dunk way back when. Those classic Suns jerseys. I'm not sure what team he was on at the time, and he might have appeared in a later NBA Jam game. But I will say that NBA Jam was able to get almost all the key people that it needed, and I think that really helped the game. The biggest omission, of course, is Michael Jordan. Besides that, I always think about Magic Johnson, how he was somebody who was actually, the Midway team was thinking about. They pitched to the NBA that they wanted Magic Johnson for the game. That one didn't work out either. I'm guessing it was some sort of licensing thing.
Was he
From some
still in
biggest
the
snaps.
NBA at that point, or like in terms of
Yep,
like a
yeah. So
timeline when NBA Jam was
right,
being
it's
made?
weird. It's so weird that Magic Johnson would have still been in the NBA, but that was like
Mhm.
the tail end of his career. So that was
Mhm.
right when he was at the end. I know he had a comeback season. This might have been the comeback season,
Oh yeah, I
or maybe
forgot
that
about
was.
that. It was,
Yeah,
yeah,
Magic
yeah.
Johnson. Nobody ever talks about Magic Johnson's comeback season. Yeah, or maybe I thought actually maybe his comeback was like a couple of years later. I don't remember the exact timeline, but
It
whatever the
was
case was. Yeah,
if I remember, it was like 95, like the 95 season. But like yeah, NBA Jam was
95. Yeah,
ready to
because
go. Like
yeah, and I for some reason I associate Kevin Garnett with Magic Johnson's comeback also. So maybe Kevin Garnett was rookie at that time or something. Just weird to me thinking about Kevin Garnett and Magic Johnson playing together.
wow, I
Um,
completely forgot
but
about that whole
that
stretch,
whole
that
era,
second
yeah.
half.
They
And
they, they got to do a last dance of that. They got to do like a
yeah,
special like yeah one episode of Magic Johnson's comeback that nobody talks about. Man, I really so I honestly have to I would really have to rack my brain to think of people that NBA Jam didn't include because they got all the big ones. Magic Johnson was somebody that they wanted to get that they didn't get. Oh boy. Man, I know I'm gonna think of something. I'm gonna think of an amazing answer as soon as we're off of here. I'm gonna be like, oh, I should have mentioned so and so. But you know what's cool is that NBA Jam got to be such a success that they ended up bringing in people like Joe DeMars, who was not in the original NBA Jam. He was in TE.
Mm.
Managed to come in, and then who else was another one? Isaiah Ryder from the Timberwolves wasn't in that very first NBA Jam Timberwolves squad, but he was in Tournament Edition, I think, or at least the home games. So what was so cool about it is they were able to bring in other people with those updates. So when it comes to the original, I'd say yeah, my mind always goes towards the big ones of Jordan and Magic Johnson. I would really have to think really hard about the other ones, but I'll probably think of something as soon as we're off of the here. But
yeah,
big ones
uh,
are Jordan and Johnson.
yeah. Well, you have spoken under interviews that Jordan. There is a version that actually a real legit version of NBA Jam that actually does have Jordan in it.
Yeah, it's
Verified
crazy.
through
Yeah,
there. Yeah. Um,
yeah.
and I guess like the question is, A, how come we just can't get a leak of this? I mean, like, you know, the ROM is out there like for everyone to
Right.
kind of see. And the second, like, I guess, why did they do that? And, you know, magically, where did it all end up?
Yeah. So this is another crazy story. This is what I really love about NBA Jam is that it's the gift that keeps on giving. Like you learn a little bit of the lore, and then you're like, okay, well Shaq really loved the game. Well, then this person also loved the game. But then yeah, Jordan was very similar to Shaq in that way, where he wasn't licensed for the game individually because of whatever agreement that he had. At that point, of course, Michael Jordan was the hottest thing in the world, so he could call whatever shots he wanted.
Yeah.
Um, so he wasn't in that original game, but he was somebody that Midway wanted. And then NBA Jam ended up being this massive success, making $1 billion, which is just mind blowing. Thinking of an arcade game making $1 billion is
Well,
just really
when you say $1 billion, are you
yeah.
saying the franchise as a whole, or just that
Just that very
original?
first game in
Wow.
quarters slash seconds, first game, and $1 billion is on. That's on the probably on the more conservative estimate. You know, that's on. Got to be on the. I've heard Tim Kitzrow say, 1.5 billion, 1 point something billion. So it's definitely over $1 billion. And Jurassic Park, this is the number I always like to use. Jurassic Park made 343 million in 1993, and that was the hottest thing in 1993.
Yep.
And NBA Jam came out the same year, tripled it. It's
Wow.
just crazy. I mean, Jurassic Park was the movie. It was just pop culture, And NBA Jam was like that too. So eventually, NBA Jam became so big that Michael Jordan was, I'm not sure if he was a fan of the game or if he maybe just heard about it, but he decided that he wanted his own NBA Jam machine. So he, or not he specifically, but somebody from his team reached out to Midway and said, hey, can we get a special version of the game with Michael in it? And keep in mind that Midway's offices were in Chicago, so chances are everybody was a big fan of the office. At least most people were, except for Mark Trammell. So they decided to put
What
together a
was Mark
special version
Tremell
of
a
the
fan
game.
of? What team
Oh,
was?
he was a huge fan of the Pistons.
Oh,
Huge fan of the Pistons, yeah. And he had a whole rivalry going on with the Bulls fans in the office. So, for example, John Tobias and Ed Boon, the Mortal Kombat creators, they were huge Bulls fans. Termel, huge Pistons fan. So when the bad boy Pistons beat the Bulls in the late 80s, this is right when Termel had joined Midway. Termel walked around the office in his Pistons swag or in his Pistons merch, and he was chanting "bad boys" like the other guys in the office. So these guys love basketball. So there was clearly, a lot of interest and a lot of passion over there. But yeah, so Jordan or somebody in his camp heard about this and reached out to Midway and said, "Hey, can we get a special version of the game with him in it?" So they got their special version of the game. But what was weird is that it wasn't just for him. It was with two other people. One was Gary Payton. Actually, going back to your question, Gary Payton was not in the original NBA Jam,
Oh, he
and that's what everybody thinks about.
You're
He was
right.
not.
It was Detlef, I think.
Yeah, no, Detlef was actually in one of the. It was in Tournament Edition, also. Yeah.
Oh.
No. It was.
It was Sean Kemp, for sure.
And this guy whose last name is Benjamin. I think.
Or was it Nate?
I know you're thinking of McMillan.
Yeah, Nate McMillan.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Nate McMillan. I can see his last name in my mind's eye right now. I think his last name was Benjamin.
For anyone, again, just wondering like what 90s NBA was like, again, we're riffing on like kind of legends here. That tells you like how crazy.
Yeah.
Like Detlef Schrempf was kind of like an all-star at one point. Nate McMillan was like a Seattle hero. So just to kind of give you the gist of like how crazy it is to kind of think about all the players that were featured in NBA.
All the great personalities. It was such a special time. But yeah, so Gary Payton and Michael Jordan were rivals on the court, but they were friends in real life. So Gary Payton wanted in on the special NBA Jam version, and then Ken Griffey Jr. also wanted in, which is crazy.
Wow.
So you've got Michael Jordan, Gary Payton, Ken Griffey Jr. They're all in one version of NBA Jam together. And this is a special version that Trammell and the NBA Jam team, they burned the boards out. I imagine they send them out free arcade cabinets. But Jordan got one. Gary Payton got at least one. I think he got two. And so, Ken Griffey Jr. got one also. And so then Trammell himself. So
when you're saying Gary Payton was in it, he actually just requested an NBA Jam version that had Jordan and had him in it.
And had him in it, right. So he got to be an NBA Jam before he was officially an NBA Jam. So, of course, he did become really a big part of that NBA Jam lore with Sean Kemp in Tournament Edition. But if you go back to that first NBA Jam, he's not there. And he really loved the game and he wanted to be in it.
Wow.
So, yeah. So he had so it was those three. And then Trammell kept a board too. So all these guys, they've got their NBA Jam versions out there. But they're not the kind of people that are going to rip ROMs or burn them, or be able to hold on to them. So so that's the big reason that it's been lost to time. It's out there, but it's in the hands of people who enjoy NBA Jam, but they're not going to be like, oh boy, we got to preserve this history right here. Except for Trammell, who I've tried to get time and time again to dig up those boards. I was like, I know you've got them out there, and he's like, I do have them in his garage or in some sort of storage room, and they're sitting there. There's a whole pile of unmarked Midway boards. And there's one arcade board, at least one of them, that, if you hook it all up, it would have Michael Jordan NBA Jam.
Wow.
But it's sitting there untouched, covered in dust. People would, if that news came out tomorrow, here's the real official Michael Jordan NBA Jam, people's minds would be blown. News websites would be copying and pasting the hell out of that. But
someone has got to call Trammell. Someone's got to call Trammell right now. Hey, dude, I don't know if you realize people are really going crazy over The Last Dance. There's no better time to kind
this
of
is. I mean, this would be the time to do it. Yeah, maybe I should. Maybe you know what? I'm gonna poke him again. I do it from time to time, and he says he will kind of he'll brush me off, not in like a nasty way or anything. He's like, oh yeah, it's there, it's somewhere. I want to try to get it. So it's like I know that it's out there, but the matter is of motivating him and being like, okay, find that board, send it on over. We've had game preservationists and historians who've offered Trammell, hey, send over the board to me, and I'll make sure that it's, I'll make sure the ROM gets ripped.
Well, you said he's a big Pistons. You said he's a big Pistons fan, though. So the only thing I can possibly think of is that the reason why he wouldn't want this is because whereas Isaiah Thomas got snubbed from the Dream Team, this would be kind of, in a way, Jordan was snubbed from NBA Jam. It's kind of like his, like, haha, F you.
I love that. You are playing 4D chess. That is awesome. I never thought of that angle before. That is an excellent theory. I love that. In my head, that's going to be now why there's no Michael Jordan NBA Jam. It's going to be because of what happened with Isaiah Thomas. Wow. I love that connection. Yeah. So
I just thought about it just now. Like, there's so many.
No, that's brilliant. No. I legitimately never thought of that. Now that's going to be the reason is he's doing it because, he's got that beef still after all these years. So also speaking of the Pistons, I got this is my glass of water for tonight, the classic Pistons logo. So Trammell would appreciate this, 1989 NBA World Champions.
And it's funny because one of the things when I look at the Pistons, again, I can talk about like the player ratings like all day, and I always would remember that playing as the Pistons was really hard because their dunk for Lambeer and Isaiah Thomas, I do remember their dunk rating was like 0, and I was like, oh come on, man, I don't want to do layups all game. What would have Jordan's stats have been if like what could you assume it would have been if it was like public? Would everything have been like 10 or like full power?
Oh yeah. So so do you know who the single best character is in NBA Jam?
No.
Like the very best one of them all.
My guess would be Scottie Pippen.
So I said, I mean, across NBA Jam. So we're talking
Oh,
potentially secret characters, everybody.
um, Kerry Hoskins. I'm lost.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. No, it's Mark Trammell. Mark
Oh,
Trammell's the very best character. So when he programmed those secret characters, he was like, Mark Trammell's the kind of guy that's like, yeah, it's my game. I'll do what I want. So he gave himself 9s and 10s. So Trammell is the Michael Jordan of NBA Jam. So I imagine if there was a Michael Jordan in NBA Jam, he would have 9s or 10s too. Although knowing Trammell, he would probably like kick down his stats a little bit still, quietly, to be like, you know what? No, like, I still got to be on top. But yeah, Trammell had incredibly good stats, and I just got to say that, or just have to see that happening, that he's going to be, he'll be putting himself a little bit above Jordan.
Wow. That's
my
another
guess.
That's another Detroit haha moment right there for Trammell. So we're getting I just want to get to some of the few questions because I just mentioned Kerry, who many people will know. We actually interviewed her recently. Many people know from the Mortal Kombat games, but she actually was a cheerleader in NBA Jam. And this is kind of like a really interesting question. Whatever happened to the other cheerleader other than Kerry? I don't know like really much of the backstory of like any of the promos, but is there any backstory to her that you know of?
Yeah, she's super cool. Yeah. Her name is she's actually, you can find her on Twitter underneath Libby Hawker. Her name that you'll see in NBA Jam is Lorraine Olivia. So I think her actual name is Lorraine. She goes by Libby. But yeah, so the whole story of Kerry and Lorraine joining NBA Jam is super cool too. So this is, going back to, let's say, 1992 when they were putting together NBA Jam. Kerry Hoskins is a Playboy playmate who's also working at the Playboy offices. So, or a Playboy model that's also working at the Playboy offices.
Like as an office worker.
Right. She was working with photographs at that point. So
Wow.
she was like, she'd worked with people enough that they've said, okay, we see you as more than a model. Like we see that, you could actually do other things over here too. So she was like working with photographs one day at the Playboy office when this phone rang. And somebody picked up the phone and they didn't know what this person was talking about. So they came over to Kerry and they said, hey, Kerry, do you have some time to talk to somebody? Like this guy's calling about some video game or something. And the person on the other end of the line was this fellow named Jack Hager, who was an artist at Midway back in the day. So he worked on all these classics. He worked on Terminator 2. He worked on NHL Open Ice. He worked on Narc. He worked on tons of games. And he was another unsung hero for Midway, who was really, I love these classic shots. Man, it just takes me back. Even the photo quality just takes me back.
Yeah. And
not even what's in the photo, just the photo quality. Yeah.
And by the way, if this photo tried to come out now in 2020, they would not allow that because Kerry's holding a champagne bottle.
Ooh, I never thought about that.
So
yeah.
26, this would automatically get an M rating.
Right.
One photo
Yeah.
alone.
Also, they're not holding the Larry O'Brien trophy either. That always like boggled my mind when I thought about it. It was
Really?
like they're holding like some kind of, I'm pretty sure it's just a trophy that they got at a store somewhere in Chicago. They're just like, hey, if you reach the end of this, then this is what you get. You don't get the Larry O'Brien trophy because you can't afford it. But if somebody at the NBA can send it to us, you're getting this trophy. Wow. You're getting the NBA Jam trophy. But yeah, so Kerry was working over there, and she ended up taking the phone and talking to Jack Hager, and Jack was like, we need a model for this game we've got going on at Midway. And Kerry wasn't a video game player, but she was like, okay, yeah, sounds interesting. Yeah, sure, we could potentially do it. So she enlisted somebody else. She enlisted Lorraine. So Kerry was the first one who got the offer at Midway to come work on NBA Jam as a cheerleader, to be digitized for the sidelines, and then also to be used for promo photographs and game photographs, things like that. So Lorraine Olivia ended up coming along because Lorraine was actually a cheerleader before, or rather a cheerleader as a teenager. Mm-hmm. Kerry wasn't. So Kerry felt like she's just going in, she's doing this gig, but she has no idea what cheerleading routines look like, doesn't know what she's doing. So she ends up getting Lorraine to join her also. So Lorraine and Kerry, they have a great time with the shoot and whatnot. And then Kerry, of course, ends up getting more work with being Mistress Helga in Revolution X, and being in Cruisin' USA, and of course Sonya in Mortal Kombat 3. I mean, she's one of those icons of the 90s for, for a certain demographic. Like, if you were a kid in the 90s, I'd say 93 to 98 or so, like and you played video games, you would absolutely recognize that
You
face.
knew,
So,
yeah,
especially
everyone who played,
yeah,
every teenager who played video games or a kid in the 90s, you knew who Kerry Hoskins was. And I probably would say it wasn't a midway game for some reason, unless Kerry was in it now.
exactly, yeah.
Um,
So she was one of those iconic things about Midway. Yeah, she was kind of like that sort of the pinup queen of that sort of Chicago arcade scene at that point. And then, reused over and over again. But yeah, Carrie had a great experience with that first game. And then they said, hey, you want to come back in and do some more? Lorraine, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure she just ended up over there because of Carrie, and she never worked with another Midway game after that. Man, that's such a good deep cut question. I don't know exactly why she was never offered another gig, because there were other cheerleading opportunities later on, like in NBA Hang Time. There's cheerleaders in that game, but they got totally different cheerleaders. So I don't know the specific story as to why she didn't end up over there. But yeah, Lorraine Libby, she's alive and well. She's a realtor. And she told me some great stories. She loved NBA Jam too, even though she was, there's the duo over there that Carrie is the really remembered one because Carrie launched her whole career off of it in Midway. Lorraine was such a cool part of it too. And she told me this great story about how she went on her honeymoon to Jamaica. I'm guessing it was a few years after this game came out, and then she saw an NBA Jam cabinet on her honeymoon. So that's when she personally got to see, like, okay, this is how big this thing is. That she goes to Jamaica on her honeymoon, and there's an NBA Jam cabinet. So don't know exactly why she never worked with Midway again, but she definitely loved and appreciated NBA Jam.
but wow, I mean, even the backstories that would just carry right place, right time.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
what are the odds? And then,
Right.
just pretty much set her career in the 90s, like just literally from one phone call. Why did they decide to just call it Playboy? Has that ever, like, was there a reason why they said? I mean, obviously,
yeah.
Attractive people,
Yeah.
but why did they not
Well, the
just go
big
with
thing
normal?
was,
Mhm.
yeah. So Playboy had I think they still do. They had a Chicago office,
Mhm.
and that was probably about maybe like 7 or 10 miles away from the Midway building.
Mhm.
So they were like, we need cheerleaders from the game. Oh, let's call Playboy. So it was a shot in the dark. I'm sure that there was, like, if somebody else might have answered, they'd been like, okay, buzz off, creep. Like, they would not have had time for it. But whomever answered the phone that day was like, oh, okay, I'll give it over here to Carrie. Absolutely right place, right time. And what's funny is that Carrie ended up leaving her job at Playboy to work on Midway games. So she kind of changed her image, from working in that world to more working with, doing things like being in not only those video games, but going on the Mortal Kombat Live tour. So she was part of that too. So Carrie, like, propelled that into a whole thing.
Yep. And we just have some other quick questions. What's your go-to team? And this is a really great question for a guy that is, like, let's be honest, you're an NBA Jam connoisseur, so you should know better than anyone. But what would be your go-to team, and why?
My go-to team has to be, it's the classic or the cliche, but it's the classic or cliche for a reason. And that is, man, it's got to be the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz were just so spectacular. You had Karl Malone, John Stockton, and those guys were just so big at the time. And obviously they're part of the Dream Team at that point too, and the Jazz squad is fantastic. And those guys are such a big part of NBA Jam lore as well. So NBA Jam is one of those things that people always associate with those player statistics, those 4 attributes that we're talking about earlier.
Yep.
Well, those attributes almost didn't exist in the game until one night at the arcade. Somebody was playing a very early version of NBA Jam and was telling somebody else, they're saying, hey, make sure that the ball doesn't get close to Stockton because he's going to steal it. Well, John Stockton and Karl Malone's stats were the exact same. And this activity among other things, prompted Midway to take a second look at it and be like, maybe we should actually make these stats matter. So what's crazy is that in its very first iteration, NBA Jam was, everybody played the same. I described it as M&Ms in the book, where it's like all different colors on the outside, but it's all the same on the inside. So the Utah Jazz were such a big part of that the team went back in later that night, back into the studio after going to this arcade to start working on their stats and putting it all together. So they're a big part of NBA Jam lore. And I mean, the classic squad, super fun to play as. And I feel like it's one of those things. They're a classic or a cliche, but it's there for a reason. I mean, they're just so damn good. But when it comes to tournament edition, then it's got to be the Supersonics.
Oh, who could forget again having Rain Man, Sean Kemp,
Oh yeah.
the glove Gary Payton, and I believe the sub was Detlef, I think was.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
pretty much
What a
ultimate.
squad.
It's funny. We actually also got a question to our DMs that basically said when NBA Jam came out for the SNES, the Sonics and the Knicks were the final two teams. Was that because they were considered the best? And ironically, I look back at the timing of when the NBA Jam home release came out and who made the NBA Finals that year. It was the Knicks, and the Sonics probably, I believe, were the number ranked team in the West if they had not got eliminated by the Nuggets that year, who were the eighth place seed.
Yeah.
So, wow, how good is kind of, you think about that, how great was kind of the predictions of the programmers to say,
Right.
let's make the Knicks and the Sonics be the two last final teams, not the Bulls, you know, which were, the, you know, the champions, obviously. Just out of curiosity, I guess, is there, who had to make the stats? And B, whose stats do you feel were just kind of way off, whether it be like they were overpowered or underpowered?
Yeah. So when on the stats front, it was Mark Trammell and John Hay who came up with those.
Those
so
dirty
Trammell,
guys, man.
Yeah.
Dirty
so
players.
what's funny is that, so there was 7 guys in the midway team, and you've got the lead designer and then the audio guy, who are both big NBA fans, coming up with this. Nowadays, I imagine if you made an NBA game, you'd have to go through a lot of red tape to be like, okay, let's do this or do that. Let's make this stat, that stat. And you've got all this QA and this big team. In that case, you just said, hey, you know what? Let's go look at the box scores. Let's look at some magazines. Let's, watch some TV. How are people doing? So that's how they picked the roster. They pretty much picked it based on whomever was hot at that moment. That's a really cool question about thinking about the end team of NBA Jam, as in like whether it was because they were the
final
best.
boss.
The final boss of NBA Jam. Yeah. God, you know what would have been amazing if Jordan would have appeared, like Jordan and Pippen would have been the final boss. Oh, now I want that to happen too.
No, it would have just been a 2-on-1 at that point. It would have just been Jordan as versus you, and he would have had like 4 life bars somehow.
I'm surprised I wasn't an arcade legend. Yeah. I'm surprised there wasn't a legend out there about that. One of the cool things about doing this book was I got to go through like all these old Usenet forum posts about NBA Jam. So like back in the early days, people were still commenting on message boards about it. And there was somebody who said, I went to the Mall of America today and I saw the Michael Jordan game. Like I saw Michael Jordan in this machine. And somebody else had to be like, that's BS. Like that did not happen. But like, the interest was there and the rumors were there. So that's just how much it really stoked people's imaginations. You know what? I think there's probably some credibility in that theory, because when I think about the arcade version, the Mavericks are always the first team you play if you're playing solo, or at least from what I remember. And the Mavericks were terrible. Like the Mavericks were god awful. They were right there at the bottom.
I forgot who it was too. I think it was like Derek Harper, who would become a New York Knick, I think.
Right.
But it was like, I forget. It was like Derek Harper and
Mike Izzolino.
Yeah,
Mike Izzolino. Yes, Mike Izzolino. Who was, it was weird. Like that was his only claim to fame. So, even then, years afterward, people still come up to him when they hear about Mike Izzolino. They're like, "Oh, you Mike Izzolino from NBA Jam?" Or they still know him, and he'd be like, "How do you know that?"
Wow.
But that was his one claim to fame. He was on the Mavericks for a cup of coffee.
Wow. Someone should tell him, Mike, you are one level above Michael Jordan in your career. You are in NBA. You are good enough to
in NBA Jam,
but not Jordan.
Exactly. Yeah, I want to be like Mike Izzolino. That's who. Yeah, exactly. That's what it's about. So. Yeah, who is poorly, man, in terms of the ratings, I would say that a lot of that was really fair. I mean, I wish they would give the Pistons something, though, in terms of dunks. I never really played as the Pistons, so I didn't know about the layup factor. I was reading somewhere that I think it was Scottie Pippen's defense. Somebody's defense was not as good as it should have been. But, there was I think they did a good job overall, though, because, you have to keep in mind there's no internet. So these guys are guessing. These guys are like, okay, who's this guy? I mean, I can't imagine that they were fans of what's a random team, the Milwaukee Bucks, let's say. But then they got Blue Edwards in there. They got Brad Lohaus.
They're totally like, okay, forgot about
yeah, like how am I going to rate these guys? I'm sure these guys were just like, okay, they probably rolled some dice or something. They flipped a coin. They closed their eyes, pulled I can see pulling them an abacus, trying to see where the stats would land on it or something, maybe a Ouija board. They were just guessing, man. And that's what's cool about it too, is I love the fact that like you can have this huge mega property and you can have things about it that were not totally, not everything is QA tested, not everything is gone through that vigorous vetting. Some of it was just like, yeah, it's on the fly. You know what? Mike Islino's having a hot week. Let's put him in NBA Jam. Yeah. So he's gonna become a legend for that.
So what I love about your book is, to me again, how it parallels almost like The Last Dance, and it almost like you also cover a lot of the drama that people just don't realize was happening behind the scenes. And you mentioned Acclaim earlier, and one of the questions that we actually just saw right now is, how did Acclaim get away with copying the same engine? And so obviously you'll go, everyone should just check out the book to understand exactly how there is this whole rift between Midway and Acclaim, and how Acclaim essentially got away with the NBA Jam license. I guess when writing this book, how much of this drama were you surprised by in terms of like all the research that you had to do and like uncovering everything? And did it ever get to a point of being like, oh my gosh, how did this even get out of here? How did this even happen? Like,
right. Well, I was a little surprised, I gotta say. Well, keep in mind that I grew up with NBA Jam as a huge fan, so I was there, loving those games, playing those games, and imagining that everybody got along. You say, oh wow, this has got to be the best job in the world. We're making video games. All these guys got to love their job. Like, you don't really think about the people behind the scenes, especially back then before social media or anything like that. But of course, money overall, like money conquers everything in terms of partnerships. But yeah, Acclaim had a really good relationship with Midway in the late 80s, I think is when it started. They got the NARC license. And then they got, they signed on at just the right time, and they're saying, okay, we're going to make home adaptations of your games. And, at that point, Midway had, Midway was a name, but, Mortal Kombat had not come out yet. NBA Jam had not come out yet. Like they had not had Terminator 2 yet. So it was a little bit of a gamble, but Acclaim would do that. Acclaim would work with all these different companies and then, convert the games from the arcade to the home, see which one does well, and just, roll with that one. So Acclaim's strength was really in the marketing. So Mortal Kombat comes out, huge success, massive success. Keep in mind, before that, Terminator 2's come out, huge success. And Acclaim is now understanding that Midway is the real deal and that these games are really, really doing well. So they had that whole marketing campaign for Mortal Kombat, Mortal Monday, which I loved. Like, that whole campaign was fantastic. So there's a fellow over at Acclaim named Sam Goldberg who was responsible for that. And he put together that whole campaign with the iconic ads and all that stuff. And they had pre-release merchandise. I mean, really novel things for the time. You couldn't really get pre-release merchandise with games all the time like you do now. Like, it was, they were really thinking ahead. But they had a great marketing campaign. And that's really where Acclaim's strength was. Like, Acclaim understood that a game just won't sell itself to this home audience. We have to really make them understand how cool is Mortal Kombat, how cool is NBA Jam.
Yep.
So they were crucial to NBA Jam's success.
Yeah, and for people who don't kind of realize like how critical Acclaim was to like video game history, they were really the first companies to kind of use like kind of MTV style like ads. So I do remember the Mortal Kombat, Mortal Monday ads or Nothing Can Prepare You Now, where it was a lot of times they would actually film like people on the street, kind of just like all rushing, like a building or something like that.
Yeah.
And, really probably the only other company that had like advertising like that was probably Sega, that probably had that mature type of like edgy marketing. So
very much.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess like when you were writing this book, it's also fascinating for people to also understand, like, you're not just covering NBA Jam up until like NBA Jam TV. You kind of go like all the way into the like the lore. Even I think you go as deep as to like when it kind of came out for like the latest iteration of NBA Jam, which was like the stuff that came out like in the late 2000s or so a real fun question that we got that came from you was, do you consider NBA Jam Extreme canon?
Oh gosh.
And to get back to it for people who will be watching this video, NBA Extreme was the first NBA Jam game that was purely under Acclaim, and it was controversial, I guess, in a sense. So where does that fit in your viewpoint?
Well, I'm gonna take this question and I'm gonna combine that with the previous, because I realized I'd never answered the previous question too, as to how Acclaim ended up getting that that whole engine. So Acclaim had their own engine that they took the NBA Jam code from the arcade game and then they made it into those home games. So then that was Acclaim's property at that point.
Wow.
That was Acclaim's. And then this whole rift happens, but Acclaim still makes games with the NBA Jam mold. There's College Slam, which Trammell hated. Trammell really despised College Slam because he felt it was a cheap knockoff.
Whose was that? That was Acclaim's.
That was Acclaim. Yeah.
Wow,
So
okay.
Acclaim made College Slam. So there was this whole rift. I think it was 990. It was 95 when it happened. I think it was 95 when it happened, where I think it was February 95, sometime around then, right when NBA Jam Tournament Edition was coming out for home consoles, that Acclaim and Midway part ways because Midway says, hey, Acclaim is making a lot of money off of the home versions of our games. Excuse me. In fact, Acclaim was making more money than Midway was, which is crazy. I mean, you are creating the game. Well, it's not crazy. That's the way. I mean, I imagine that happens a lot more than we think.
Yep.
That the person who is actually making the product doesn't make nearly as much as the person who's licensing or marketing the product the right way and selling it to the right audience. So, and Acclaim were really invested in NBA Jam at that point, but they knew that okay, the 2-on-2 NBA Jam style game was great, but by '95 it was relatively played out like that style of game. So they needed to do something new. So in 1996 they do NBA Jam Extreme, which I do consider canon. I gotta say, it was an Acclaim game. It's got NBA Jam on the cover, and it's got Sean Kemp on the cover.
Yep.
And so yeah, so it's definitely an NBA Jam game. It's a terrible NBA Jam game, but it's an NBA Jam game. So yeah, definitely was canon. But that was right when Acclaim was saying, look, ultimately we are not like that NBA Jam, the original NBA Jam. That's Trammell's vision. Our vision is not necessarily going to be Trammell's vision. Like we're here to make NBA Jam games, not necessarily Mark Trammell's games. So whether Trammell liked it or not was immaterial to them, and I imagine he probably hated NBA Jam when he played it, just like most people did. You go back and look at it, and it just doesn't hold up at all. It looks super blotchy. Excuse me. It was probably really bad I mean, I'm certain it was really bad at the time, and now in retrospect, it's even worse. When you see NBA Jam, which is kind of elegant, it's got all these hand-drawn graphics. Everybody moves really smoothly. NBA Jam Extreme, definitely canon. Terrible game, but yeah, Acclaim had the rights to that engine and then decided at some point they need to move on and do a 3D game, do the first 3D Jam, which was a big thing. That's a big talking point. Like, oh, we've got NBA Jam, but in 3D. You've got NBA Jam Extreme, crappy game, but yeah, it is official. If it says NBA Jam on the cover, it's an NBA Jam game.
Would you consider, I guess, the titles that were, I guess, after NBA Jam Extreme, like NBA Hang Time, Showtime? Do you consider those part of like the NBA Jam, I guess, canon, so to speak?
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. I think there's a really interesting parallel here with Twisted Metal. I'm a huge Twisted Metal fan, and Twisted Metal had a very similar situation where there was Twisted Metal 1, Twisted Metal 2 from Single Track, and then Twisted Metal 3 and 4 came from 99 Studios, and there was that big rift. You can play the games, you can tell that totally different people designed them. And something very similar happened with NBA Jam, where you've got the classic NBA Jam style games with NBA Hang Time and NBA Showtime, where you can tell that it's clearly the same people behind it, but totally different licenses. Obviously, it can use the NBA Jam name because Acclaim had it. Meanwhile, Acclaim is pumping out NBA Jam Extreme, 99, 2000, 2001, whatever. So it's interesting how it kind of cuts off into two different paths. But yeah, I definitely think that it's all part of the same lineage because you can't tell the story about NBA Jam without talking about NBA Jam Extreme, which was such a flop and such a fall from grace just 3 years after the game made $1 billion. I mean, it's just staggering. Imagine, you have a game and you still get the license to it, but to some degree it's your game. It makes $1 billion, and 3 years later, you make a sequel or one of the sequels, and it's a total flop. But the fact that it was such a flop is part of the NBA Jam story. Just like how Trammell and all decided, you know what? Just because they took the license doesn't mean they're going to take the game away from us. We're going to make Hang Time. We're going to make Showtime. We're going to make Ballers. We're going to continue that story. So it's all part of the overarching story.
Yeah, and again, it's a really great reason to like read your book because again, the history, it almost like covers, I would say, like 25 years of this franchise and this story of like, Midway's beginnings of becoming arcade kings to kind of like, let's, say it how it is, the fall of Midway and
Absolutely.
kind of like the end of the franchise of NBA Jam.
Yeah, the terrible decisions they made. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, your book is it's probably one of the ways like the most emotional outlooks of a video game and an era of video game history that I think like people will really like digest and see like, wow, this extends far beyond just a sort of a video game company. It's really more, and a video game itself. It's really the kind of the story of kind of a rise and fall of an icon, really
Yeah.
in American pop culture. We're coming short on time, so I really want to get on two last questions. In your viewpoint, what was NBA Jam's impact on the sport and the NBA league itself, in retrospect, looking back on all of this?
So on the NBA side, it absolutely convinced the NBA that arcade games were something legitimate. So before that, the NBA was actually not thinking about, they did not want to be associated with arcade games. I didn't even think that they really cared that much about video games themselves. I mean, you had some NBA licensed games, but even in the early 90s, it wasn't what it is now.
Mm.
It was always licensed by the individuals. Like, oh, here's Magic Johnson's Fast Break. Here's this person's this game. David Robinson's Supreme Court. And you'll see some NBA games here and there, but the NBA didn't really have a huge stake in it. And when NBA Jam hit at the 1993 NBA All-Star Weekend, and it was this huge success, all these people were playing the game, the NBA was like, whoa, this is really a thing. So I think it really opened the NBA's eyes up to arcade games and to their own video games overall. And I think that, yeah, they understood that how big and how special this is. And players across the league were playing the game. I mean, there's other ones that we haven't talked about. Sean Kemp, also an NBA Jam fan. So both Payton and Kemp, NBA Jam fans. Larry Johnson was an NBA Jam fan. All of these people. So the players loved it. They really loved seeing themselves in the game. They felt like superheroes. And it really allowed them to like see themselves in a different way and kind of become larger than life. In terms of the sports game genre, absolutely NBA Jam created the blueprint for all the sports arcade style games to come. I mean, there was other games before NBA Jam, so you've got Arch Rivals, you've got things like Double Dribble and some other games out there, but NBA Jam really laid that blueprint. So you wouldn't have had NFL Blitz and MLB Slugfest, NHL Hits, NHL Open Ice, those midway games without NBA Jam for sure. You would not have had those. But I definitely think that it influenced all those other ones too, like those Charles Barkley Shut Up and Jam, and there's a game called Jam It. There's all these NBA Jam knockoffs and tributes out there. NBA Jam's influence was just so wide ranging because I think it's such a simple concept. I mean, 2-on-2 basketball, it isn't rocket science in a way, but NBA Jam did it so well that it was the gold standard.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, like if I had to almost compare it to like what it's like now, all those memes you guys see on like Bleacher Report or Hoops Nation or Complex Sports, NBA Jam is I guess the start, really. If you kind of had to kind of describe NBA Jam in a nutshell, it's basketball memes that you can actually control.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
So I kind of just want to end it off here while we only have 2 minutes left. NBA Jam the book. It's available from Boss Fight Books. You guys can, we'll put the link on our bio link as well as in the link in our YouTube description. But I highly recommend everyone watching this video to go check it out. It is probably, in my opinion, the most definitive book ever written about NBA Jam. Probably one of the most definitive books also kind of written about the culture and history of Midway as a publisher. And again, for all of you like 90s kids out there, NBA Jam is like, there's no bigger epitome of, in my opinion, of the 90s than NBA Jam. And so this book is really kind of a capsule and a snapshot in a moment in history that really defined the generations, that really kind of almost defined like the 90s for, much of this generation.
Yeah.
So I definitely, encourage many of you guys to also, check out this book. There's so much more we can talk about. I'm literally trying to like rush this interview because I can go on for like 2 hours for you. Reyan, I want to thank you again for your time here. I will say like we definitely hope to like hear more from you in the future. We definitely got to do more of this. As you can tell, there's so many more stories that you have in doing the research for this book. So much backstory, so much history. Just even the fact that Jordan is in an NBA Jam game out there, that to me is like mind blowing. All the backstories, all the drama, all the people who had to work on this game, all kind of little tidbits that they put in. Amazing work that you did putting that into the book and making this, a reality for all the fans out there to read.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure to work on NBA Jam. I mean, what a ride Midway had, what a ride NBA Jam had. So I feel really genuinely privileged to be the person to be able to tell that story.